HQ Extend business. Safas started his career as a policeman, as a crime fighter, and left in the 90s to form a business which today is one of the preeminent fraud and risk management businesses in South Africa. It's fair to say that Safas is regarded as a doyen of the industry. He has built significant experience up over those 20-odd years, particularly within insurance space and all manners of fraud and risk compliance. Safas has also given enormously back to the community and is a director of several for good companies, as well as involved in many industry initiatives in building up the industry and assisting the industry becoming more professional and more competitive over time. Gareth Young is our second lead on the panel. Gareth is an attorney by profession. He spent 6 years in practice, was then did a stint within a mining house where he was exposed to all manner of transactions and all manner of compliance, governance and risk issues. He then joined ABSA in the investment banking division as head of risk, and joined Fatima Newman, our cluster CEO, 5 years ago, when Fatima was part of the Stephen Van Coller core team tasked with fixing the issues that EOH had at the time, which related to governance, risk and compliance matters in the main. So Gareth has lived the reality of fixing a business, dealing with issues like this. Then we've got Cliff McGregor. Cliff is an admitted advocate. He runs our Indexo business, and Cliff and his team are experts in the legal aspects of governance, risk and compliance, and in today's conversation, a particular expertise and focus on the risk management and compliance program. Supporting is Rav Pillay. Rav is our head of technology. He also runs one of the businesses within the Easy HQ, so he double hats, and Rav is available to answer any technical questions that may arise. We also have Bruce Van Aert. Bruce works alongside Gareth, and Bruce is our workflow and process expert in the world of governance, risk and compliance, and he is the chief architect of the systems that we use in a way that enables us to manage our processes digitally and electronically. And then we have Major Modibelele. Major has just joined us as our pricing guru. Major possesses a CIMA qualification and is making a wonderful difference to our business. With that done from an introduction perspective, I'm going to share my screen and jump straight in. I hope my screen is visible. Right, the agenda for the conversation is going to be, we're going to talk about the requirements of being an accountable institution. We're going to touch on the impact of being an accountable institution on businesses and on their customer experience. Then we're going to take you through our KYC solution. We have an opportunity for questions and answers, and then we conclude. Feel free to ask questions in the text box during the course of the presentation, or save your Q&A for the Q&A section, and we will get to them. Right. The definition of an accountable institution is not new. It's been around for some time, but was brought into stark focus in South Africa with the issues experienced around the Financial Action Task Force requirements from a country compliance perspective. I think everybody is aware that the FATF signaled to South Africa that they were concerned about the level of KYC compliance within the country, and it eventually resulted in our grey listing some time back. As part of the Financial Intelligence Centre's efforts to improve our compliance with FATF requirements, they announced the expansion of the Accountable Institution program, and they increased the categories of AIs by 4. The majority of 3 of the 4 are quite technical additions. It's things like cryptocurrency exchanges, payment gateways, a specific government entity. But there was one category that was introduced that has expanded the framework, or the net, if you like, of businesses that are now considered to be accountable institutions considerably. And that is companies that engage in high-value transactions, where a high-value transaction is regarded as a transaction that either in aggregate or individually is, with a particular customer, is 100,000 Rand or more, particularly focused within the retail space. So all of a sudden, brought into the accountable institution net are companies like estate agencies, property developers, motor dealerships, art dealers, auctioneers, and a host of others that were previously excluded from the definition of being an accountable institution. What one has to do is, once one is an accountable institution, is register with the FIC, the Financial Intelligence Centre. You must appoint a risk officer, and that risk officer has to develop and implement a risk management and compliance plan for the business. That risk management and compliance plan needs to focus on how the institution guards against the promotion of terrorist financing, or the expansion of proliferation financing, or money laundering, and requires essentially 3 components. The first part is KYC, know your customer. The second part is the anti-money laundering checks. And the third part then is an ongoing focus on suspicious transaction monitoring from your clients. So the whole process does not stop at the initial transaction. It continues over the life of your relationship with the customer. The output of each of those 3 checks is then measured against the risk management control plan, and there have to be business decisions taken in accordance with the requirements of the business's risk management control plan. Those decisions could be to allow a transaction to proceed unhindered, or it could require the company to continue with the transaction, but report the transaction to the FIC, or it may require the company to abandon the transaction, not proceed with the customer, and still report the potential transaction or the terminated transaction to the FIC. Over time, the outcomes from the checks at the business level need to be reviewed and checked, and the RMCP adjusted if necessary, in order to enable the company to manage risks better. This is obviously a complex requirement with many changes, regulatory changes, execution challenges, all of these kinds of issues. It's one thing to deal with the performance of the requirements of being an accountable institution, but it is a completely separate story when one thinks about its impact on your business, its impact on your customer experience, and so on. And this is what we're going to focus on today. And I hope by using a range of practical and real-life lived examples that we can give you a better sense of the kind of experience we have and the kind of capability and capacity we have. With that in mind, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to introduce our panelists again, and I'm going to ask a few questions of them. And Gareth, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, every business in the markets has to survive competitively. It competes for customers, it competes for volume against its competitors. And one of the concerns that we've had expressed by a number of our customers is what happens to them if their competitor does not comply with the requirements of being an AI. Your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Keith, and thanks for the opportunity. Just hold on a few seconds. It's got to. Okay. Lovely. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me, Keith?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Thanks for having me, and welcome to everybody who's joined. So when you ask about consequences, that is interesting, and I think Surpass will probably agree with me in terms of we can tell you theoretically what the consequences are, and certainly what the risks are. It would be remiss of me not to mention, and I guess, to be honest, though, the regulators looking after particularly these aspects are efficient, and they are issuing fines. They've been active in the space in trying to enforce. And I guess it's all really driven by the need for South Africa to get off of the grey list, in terms of which the FATF have put us on. It is limiting investment. We're seeing large withdrawals out of the country in terms of foreign direct investment. So there's a real urgency in terms of getting corporate South Africa to assist in getting ourselves compliant, and really showing good progress in the prevention of bribery and corruption and money laundering. So when you ask, what happens to a competitor or how do you compete? I mean, there's really two aspects there. And one is, if you get caught out, if you haven't done the necessary checks, if you're not adhering to all the obligations that an AI needs to, you ultimately can face not only a fine, a regulatory fine, but it will have massive reputational issues on you. Reputational especially from the perspective if you face off to international clients or international third parties, especially those kind of in North America, Europe, Britain, and those places that are quite strict listings rules, quite strict corporate governance in terms of the legislation that they have, in that they cannot do business with people that aren't able to comply with these kind of requirements. So from that point of view, if you're not complying, it'll take you out the market completely.
Gareth, it would be I suppose a follow-on question, and this is perhaps anathema in the South African culture, but in order to ensure a better business environment, if your competitor is not complying with the rules as required by the FIC, it would be reasonable to report that entity to the FIC for non-compliance. Why? Number one, it creates an unlevel playing field. Two, that behavior is contrary to the best interests of South Africa, and therefore the best interests of all South Africa. So one of the I think the issues that South African businesses often seem to grapple with is, I don't want to tell on. But perhaps the approach that we should be adopting as a country is a far, far more responsible corporate citizen, and reporting issues of non-compliance, major issues of non-compliance, potentially like this kind of thing, to the authorities. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Keith, I think there's two aspects there. One is if we look at the big picture, and especially where we're coming from in terms of a country, in terms of where we are and what we need, We very much need that investment. We need to grow the economy. And one of the ways to grow that is to be compliant, is not to be on the grey list, is to create a sense of trust and credibility out there in the international market. One does need to bear in mind, though, that not everybody is an accountable institution.
Correct.
The latest amendments, a lot more people are, and it's certainly capturing a lot more of the market. My philosophy is this is always good standard practice that anybody should be putting in. It helps make your business far more sustainable going forward, whether you're an accountable institution or not. However, in terms of the law, only accountable institutions really have to apply with the obligations. Although one must remember that in terms of PRECA, that you always have an obligation, and I think there's Safaska maybe coming to say, I'm not sure if the bill has been passed yet or not, but I know that they are strengthening it or looking to strengthening it in terms of placing obligations on people that if you did see something or you do suspect something and you haven't reported it, you yourself will be liable to action from the regulators.
Thanks, Gareth. Safas, if I could ask you to comment on that, and perhaps if you could just outline any other benefits that you think may be available to companies that do comply and comply properly outside of the pure compliance benefit. Are there other benefits that they can get?
I certainly think so, Keith. If you just look at since the implementation of the new FIC editions, with the supervisory bodies, the FIC have done more than 200 inspections, and they've issued financial penalties to the value of about 78 million rand for companies not complying. Now, there's always the old cliche, if you think compliance is very expensive, you should see what the cost is of non-compliance. And you can see it with several other companies, ERH being one, of the billions of rands worth of shareholder value destroyed because of non-compliance. The likes of the Hewletts and the Steinhoffs of this world. And there's plenty of examples. So I certainly think if you want to avoid a penalty ranging anywhere between 5 million and 100 million rand, or even 15 years in jail, not even to mention the consequences of PRECA and some of the other criminal legislation, it certainly would bode you well to comply rather than to sit and wait to see whether you can get away with non-compliance.
I think that's right, but I'm guessing there are other benefits as well. You would know your customers better, for example, and that could lead to future positive business benefits.
Absolutely. I think the three main benefits, obviously reputation, which is most crucial. Once you've lost that, you can't regain it in the industry where it takes a very long time. You are reducing your exposure and the likelihood that you would become a victim of fraud. And then lastly, you'll know and be sure that there will be accurate financial reporting, apart from all the other benefits that you just mentioned.
Thank you. Moving along, Gareth, Safas, and perhaps William, business processes have to change as a result of this compliance process. I think that there are a number of businesses that pride themselves on, for example, decision turnaround on a transaction within half an hour. I'm thinking of the motor industry. Are there ways in which these kinds of customer experiences can continue to happen in a way that's not negatively impacted by the compliance requirements?
So fast, do you go?
Yeah, so I think the buzzword and everybody's moving towards this is automation. If you invest in software that will automate part of the ongoing process required by the FIC, it helps you to manage and report on your compliance risks. It reduces inefficiencies in some of your manual processes. It definitely over time requires less resources. And with the automation, you cut out all the human errors, missing important matters due to absenteeism or bad hair days. And essentially, it allows you to focus on your core business and ROI. So, in short, my view is automation all the way.
Yeah. I think one of the other issues that people are very conscious of at the moment is how one balances issues of customer privacy. We're all familiar with POPIA, with compliance requirements. Gareth or Cliff, your comments on that?
Thanks, Keith. I think also just to echo on Sufas's previous statement, I mean, I know certainly we're making use more and more of AI simply to make it quicker and slicker. And I think that's what it's all about, is to be able to get that real-time information instantaneously so that people can make a decision that therefore enables business to get there a lot quicker. As we know, especially in terms of the fourth industrial revolution and where things are headed, speed and the ability to innovate and pivot in very short spaces of time is what's key. And certainly from a governance and risk perspective, we can't afford to be keeping businesses behind or lagging or have them lose that kind of element. In terms of POPIA, we get those questions a lot. The law is actually very clear on it. FIC, the requirement to conduct due diligences, to do background checks on third parties is very much a legitimate business interest. It's of paramount importance. It's also legislated in terms of the FIC. POPIA doesn't override this. POPIA puts into the safety rails for it. So, for instance, you can't, you'll always need to have evidence of why you're looking at what you're looking at. That is it reasonable to be looking at what you're looking at? Is the information constricted? So you're not just sharing it with everybody. It's only with the people who need to know for the exact purpose of vetting, preventing money laundering and bribery and corruption. And so I think, once again, it's everything. It's the abuse that is the issue. If you're using it for true intent, there's never gonna be an issue. But where the abuse creeps in is where the problem comes in.
But to add on to Gareth, the FIC issues public compliance notes, and in specific the requirement or the interaction between the FIC regulation and POPIA is encapsulated in that Public Council Note 22A, which clearly defines what you need and what you can and can't do. There's obviously adverse consequences for those doomsday sayers wanting to throw POPIA in the face of companies and corporates wanting to comply with the FIC. The long and the short of it is a customer refuses to give the information that you require in terms of your own compliance with the FIC, you are not allowed as a business to establish a relationship or to conduct a single transaction with that specific customer. Not in the course of business or not in any way to give effect to any transaction. So in the long and the short, and we've seen some of the banks recently take action and obviously cancel some relationships, primarily after the FATF grey listed the country. But that's in essence the future of all AIs. You will have to be cognizant of your responsibilities.
So the ability to provide a quality customer service is enabled through digitization and automation, and POPIA and the accountable institution compliance requirements do not conflict. They work hand in glove, and it's critically important to be clear on the requirements of both. Sufas and Gareth, cost drivers in a compliance program like this, and how does a company maintain this kind of effort, particularly remaining current with changing legislation? And I'm thinking here, big businesses often have people who are expert and they eat, sleep, and breathe these kinds of issues. But perhaps businesses that are slightly smaller might not have that expertise. So what's the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I think, Keith, if I can use a typical example, I mean, a lot of the people on the call will be aware, or at least have watched a few programs of MasterChef, one of these reality programs. And occasionally they will invite a chef that comes and dishes up something that looks out of a photo book, something that we as mere mortals can't comprehend. Now, similar to those master chefs, this is what we do. We are the master chefs in terms of staying on par with what is required in terms of legislation, compliance, governance. Mm-hmm. And the fortunate thing is, although stuff changes in the regulatory and the legislative framework, nothing happens overnight. There's always a lead to it, and one of the core skills of our business is to keep aware and up to date with what is happening both in Parliament from a legislative perspective, any changes or rumours of changes, any drafts, public comments before anything is signed into legislation. So that is what we live, eat and breathe. And I think it's important because we want to allow you to focus on your core business and ROI, as I mentioned earlier. So any of the newly proposed changes, we make sure that you keep compliant with the latest, so you can just continue growing and sustaining your business.
Gareth?
Yeah, thanks. Echoing what Safasa said, I think if I can just add to say what we've certainly discovered and what we're basing it on, and up to date, it's in my opinion, there's been a significant lack of investment in the GRC space. We all know that it's kind of seen as a grudge purchase. It's a back office thing. And until something really goes wrong, that's when, so you don't notice it. It's working when you don't know anything is going on. But having said that, what we've, as with the rest of industry and most of the market, have put a lot of effort into technology, specifically technology that allows you to scale the operations, to allow you to scale the controls and the processes that you need to do. So much to the point that, either if you're a big, well-established company and you've already got the team, you can certainly get more output out of them. There is room for cost saving, but it saves time, it saves money just by implementing, very easy to use kind of controls and moving away from what is traditionally largely a manual process. The other thing that technology enables you to do from a scaling point of view is for you to outsource, so that the economies of scale are obviously achieved when you've got a central party such as ourselves that are then screening and vetting for multiple clients. South Africa, for instance, I mean, it's not to ignore the international. You obviously have to very much screen for international, but more often than not, you'll be screening the same companies for more than one client. So immediately there you have time savings. And then, as I said, in terms of AI, in terms of robotic process automation, just the pulling of the information, all of the data, and we're able to now not only comply with the FIC data requirements, but even make it even more richer in terms of adding internal data. So we even look at conflicts of interest, we look at reputational risk, we can look at credit risk, as well as anti-bribery and corruption and anti-money laundering requirements, all at the same time. And those, I mean, historically, you would have had different departments look at each of those different risks in an onboarding process, and onboarding would take anything from 2 to 3 months. Where we've implemented solutions now, we've reduced that 2 to 3 months literally to a week to 2 weeks. And it also, it makes a GRC person feel far more comfortable. Everything is auditable. Everything is, everyone's able to be held account in terms of the process, in terms of the chain of custody, etc. So it's really embracing technology in what has been a really traditional space is what makes this thing work and more cost effective.
Yeah, Gareth, that's a wonderful jump-off point into our proposition, and where we can help companies is really starts off with the foundational question: am I an AI or not? And we have the ability to advise customers on whether they are an AI. If they are, we are able to assist companies register with the FIC and advise on the appointment of a risk officer. And we're happy to assist companies develop and implement their own risk management and compliance plan. I think that there are two types there. The first type is quite a traditional, almost a boilerplate approach. The FIC has published examples of that for a specific industry on their website. And some companies, smaller companies and less sophisticated companies, are generally comfortable in using that kind of approach. However, larger companies require something very specific and well thought through, and we possess the skills and the experience and the expertise to work with those companies and talk about the RMCP. Gareth, Cliff, any comments on RMC, on the risk officer and RMCP formulation?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Keith? I missed that.
So yeah, I just wanted to know whether yourself or Cliff had any comments on anything to add on the way that our system deals with the formulation of an RMCP.
Yes. So basically what we've managed to do is build the RMCP and the requirements. I mean, an RMCP at its very core applies, the very principles of it apply to any AI or any accountable institution. What it is really then plugging in what that accountable institution does as a business. What are its processes? What is its value proposition? What is its meaning for existence? And then plugging that in to your risk matrix, calculating those risks, setting out your kind of risk-based approach. And you'll always have the document because the regulator always wants to see a document, but what the system really does is automate it for you. So yes. For instance, dependent on whether you risk rate a third party high, medium or low, it immediately kicks into the level of the due diligence that is needed to be done, how often the due diligence needs to be done, the kind of automated transaction monitoring that needs to be applied, how often training or what kind of training needs to be. So it's kind of almost that blockchain event that, dependent on how you've risk rated it, or which depends on what you do, how you do it, it then kicks in all of the processes and how robust or intense those processes need to be. But again, all automated so that nobody has to actually sit there and worry and kind of guess.
So Gareth, it would take those three functions of customer identification and verification, anti-money laundering and suspicious transaction monitoring, and enable those to be compared back effectively to the RMCP.
Correct. Exactly right. In fact, so what we traditionally do is when we go and build a system or put something in place, we start off with the RMCP, and it's almost run in parallel. So we build the process or build the automation alongside the RMCP, so that basically you've got a digital version and obviously then the manual version to show you everything.
Safas, any comments you'd like to have, or you'd like to add, particularly around the system, RMCP, and environments where bulk uploading is incredibly important, perhaps of historic data?
Yeah, so we primarily focus on the volume data, where companies have multiple thousands of customers. And there are two processes. The first process, obviously, to make sure that you verify and vet the people that you already have as a customer. And we know typically in the insurance industry, a lot of your customer information sits with brokers, intermediaries, and aggregators. We assist you to identify all of those customers. So first and foremost, to see whether they pose any risks in terms of money laundering and terrorist financing. Secondly, we give you a view of who the customer is. So a high level, the customer, know your customer background, which also happens in near real time. We've recently had a customer where we did a bulk upload of 1.2 million individual customers. And within 48 hours, they had a result back in terms of who the IML and TF risks are. And that was followed up by the KYC, which was also about 48 hours. And for the first time, they have sight of who their customers are. Obviously, those customers that are then flagged as, more risky, proper due diligence will then proceed from there. But that's the first part of the process. The second part of the process, and very applicable to banks and insurance companies, is the business as usual. So onboarding new customers, some of our insurance customers onboards between 30 and 50,000 new customers a month. And you can just imagine following a manual process to try and make heads or tails of that. If you don't automate those kind of bulk processes, you'll continue to chase your tail in catching up with compliance.
Yeah. So the ability to handle volume, the ability to do it digitally, enables better business processes and practices today, but also enables businesses to have visibility of data that they've never been able to access previously. Is that right?
That's correct. And maybe just to add a last point, once we verify a individual or an ID number, and whether that is one of a couple of directors in a business or an individual legal persona, that monitoring and alerting is automatically included for a period of 12 months from the date of screening. So anything changes in a specific customer background or environment or source of income, or whether they become politically exposed or involved, the customer will then immediately, or our client will immediately get alert. So listen, something has changed in Keith McIver's world. It's probably a good time to review the diligence on McIver.
I have closed a bank account, which has resulted in a bounced debit order. So thanks for that. Decisions and reporting. Can a company outsource the decisions it makes in terms of its RMCP to a third party, or does it make its own decisions? And if and how does our system support that process? Gareth.
So Keith, I'd say it's a collaborative effort. However, so you can outsource the processes. You can certainly outsource. So what we generally do is we can give advice. We can escalate the red flags, provide them with the exceptions, give them guidance as to best industry practice, etc. But nobody can ever really, the ultimate responsibility for the risk and taking the risk lies with the CEO, the board of directors, the executive, and ultimately also the nominated money laundering officer and compliance officer. So the short answer is the decision making, I think you can influence from a third party perspective, but you can't really outsource. At the end of the day, you're the one that's going to go to jail. Therefore, I'm not sure you really want to outsource that decision to anybody else.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then again, the review and the refreshment process. How robust is my RMCP? How does it stand up to proper risk management scrutiny? It's always useful to have an expert involved in that process as well, and our process does that.
Yeah, 100%, Keith. I think also just to So in terms of all the little blocks that you've got on there, and certainly more from a BAU perspective, as Safas has highlighted, the system that we have caters for all of those, and therefore they all interact with one another. So if the automated transaction monitoring picks up an issue, then it immediately kicks into the reporting module, and the reporting can then be done. The training, the reviewing, the refreshing, the proof that people have done their training, breach management, all the way from the onboarding, the due diligence, and then obviously, assisting companies by literally, we can pull info from their CRM, push it into the ERP. Alternatively, we can form the front end where customers or third parties actually interact with the system itself and complete it on there as well.
Wonderful. You touched on training. It's not only the provision of training, it's also the record of training attendance, training completion that the system provides.
Yes, no, exactly right. And it's one of the fundamental things that the FIC looks at and the regulator looks at that can also then influence the scale of your fine. So even if something goes wrong, your fine, if you've got everything in place and you can show best efforts, the fine tends to be minimal. If you can not show anything, you haven't done anything, your fine will then be at a maximum level. So yes, training, if you aren't able to prove that you conducted adequate training at the correct kind of risk or bandwidth level, then you're in for a hiding.
Thanks. I'm going to open the floor to questions. I'm going to leave the system up here, or this diagram up, so I'm not easily able to see any questions that are being asked. But Sade, perhaps if there are questions, you can advise us what they are.
Yeah, there was one in the Q&A. It was from Charles Peacock, but I see someone from Inlexo has answered, how are lessons learned from non-compliance incidents disseminated or dealt with within our or any organization?
Wonderful question. I think very real in the EOH environment. Okay, Gareth, your comment there?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks, Charles. So what we generally do is we inculcate it into our training. You'll notice that if you've done, you guys, certainly Charles, you will have done the training. I've got record of it. So, but just to say, so exactly, and I think, having come from the history we've come from in terms of EOH, we've had a rich, certainly rich material to work from in terms of lessons learned. And so that what we do is we put those into live or real examples, or at the very least, they influence the kind of training. So that we move away from just rolling out the textbook form or ISO standard, but rather we are able to analyze, this is what's gone wrong. This is the solution that we could put in place. And this is clearly something people are either misunderstanding or are not, don't have clarity on. And then that's kind of where it influences then the content and what we focus on in terms of the training.
I think to add on to what Gareth has just mentioned, one has to understand that business evolves, stuff in business changes, and there has to be continuous improvement in the business, not only from how you present to your customers and what you sell out there, but also from a compliance perspective. You have to improve, you have to stay up to date with the most recent, and obviously from your own lessons as well as lessons learned in the wider industry, you can focus on that continuous improvement through the material that is provided via either Cerebro or Verix or from the input of our legal experts.
Thanks, Safas. Carmel, are you on the call?
Yes, yes, Keith, I am here.
Could I ask you to touch on the suspicious transaction monitoring capability you've built?
Sure, thanks, Keith. So essentially what we do is we've done a number of interactions and integrations with various sources. And that can be within the ERP systems, which we've done within EasyHQ and other businesses as well. And further interactions are taking place in terms of integrations with the banks directly. This gives us a great data source for us to pull information and data that deals with cash. And using different analytical techniques and advanced analytics, we're then able to then assess transactions for suspicious activity, both at an individual level, but also out of the norm for that industry or for that customer or client that we have of ours. Further to that, I think what we do is we interact quite closely with the RMCPs of the business to determine what additional levels of tests and analytics that we can bring in to support the risks identified in the RMCP, so that the business and executives are then able to, as Gareth said earlier, demonstrate that they've dispelled some of their responsibilities in terms of looking out for suspicious transactions and activities.
I think also, just to come in there, Camille, I work closely with Camille and his team. One of the interesting things that has changed in the FIC, not so recently, but it used to always be a very simple cash threshold or threshold-based suspicious transaction reporting. Now what it is that you actually need to go and evaluate what does the company do, what is its normal ordinary course of business. So what should you be seeing in an account, what should be happening? And then it's based on that explanation that Camille and his team are able to, their tool is flexible enough to then put in the rules and boundaries around that to then make sure that you're not bothering yourself, or you don't become inundated with a lot of what we call false red flags, where transactions ordinarily are quite normal in your business. Rather, we set up the boundaries and rules to accommodate, right, this is what your business normally does. And so, but at the same time, giving you that protective layer to see if there's something then happening that isn't in the ordinary course.
Yeah, thanks. And just to add on, I think what you do is from a client perspective or an accountable institute perspective, one of the risks that we have to manage from a AML perspective is the layering of cash, and that requires just more deeper analytics to be able to identify where those layerings take place and how they take place, so that you actually pick them up and you're able to flag them, but not just flagging them, but also assessing them to the baseline spend patterns that the person may have or the institute may have. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm reminded of a conversation I had not so long ago with a dealer principal in a motor dealership, who said that they'd had experiences of people buying quite expensive motor vehicles, chunk of the transaction involving cash, and the motor vehicle not being collected on date of sale, on date of registration, but being left at the motor dealership for some time, and then eventually the new owner phoning up the dealership and saying, can't take delivery, please just sell it for me and put the money into this bank account. And the dealer principal's observation was that it was, clearly an instance of money laundering, which I think is true. There are many others that we're aware of. Are there any other questions that are coming from our, I see we've got 62 people on. Are there any other questions that people may want to ask? There's no such thing as a silly question. Anything at all about the construct of the system, anything else about the way it works, anything from a risk and compliance perspective at all? Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to work on the assumption there's nothing else. So in closing, I just need to make a few apologies. I see that I didn't introduce Carmel up front. Carmel is our head of audit, our audit and advisory capacity within EasyHQ. Camille is a CA by profession, and an auditor of much experience. His particular, I suppose, area of enjoyment within auditing is the combination of technology, of data, and data analytics alongside the typical auditor's toolbox that's used to complete high quality audits, and Carl is at the forefront of that. Was there anybody else that I neglected to introduce from our side? I don't think so. I can't really see. If there is, I apologize. We will be sending or making available a copy of the deck to people that have attended this presentation, and I want to say thank you very much to each of you for taking the time out of your day. Yes.
There's another question, and maybe we can get Bruce to answer this. It's from Charles. How well does your system integrate with other systems? And if not, what then, or how do you proceed?
Oh, thank you. I didn't see that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rav. Yeah, it integrates really, really well with most systems. You know, the main thing these days is being able to use the API technology to get and push data to inform whatever it is that you need. So the simple answer is it's highly versatile and can integrate pretty much with anything. You know, one of the nice things is that, you know, we always tell clients, don't panic, because when something comes out, everybody turns around and seems to think, okay, we need to brush off and find a solution. And that's what Easy HQ has done, is we've spent the time with our SMEs and with our technology stack and with a full team of developers and highly skilled individuals to turn around and say, okay, look, how do we take these controls? How do we build something that somebody can implement at a very low cost and very easily, but they don't have to take specific data sets, for instance, that we would reference. If they have their own technology stack that we need to integrate to, it's very simple, very straightforward, and very easy to do. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it's a wonderful answer. Thank you, Bruce.
Oh, thank you, Keith.
Are there any other questions? I missed the last one. Apologies for that.
No, there isn't, Keith. That one came up from Charles.
Okay. All right. In terms of if anybody's interested in learning more, I will forward my contact details, Keith McIver, with an invitation to please contact me at any stage, and I will make sure that we coordinate and get in contact with you as quickly as we possibly can. And outside of that, I'm going to thank everybody for attending, both hosts, presenters, and guests, and wish you a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you all very much. Bye now.
Thank you, Keith. Bye, everyone.